I stood at the bottom of the staircase, my hand still on the banister Elias carved 30 years ago. Damian didn't flinch when he said it. Just stood there in the foyer like a landlord addressing a tenant. You've got 48 hours to get your stuff out. This house is mine now. He held up the paperwork like a trophy, clean, notarized, legal. I knew that seal. I recognized the signature. My own. I had signed it when I went into surgery last year, trusting him to handle bills in case something went wrong. Nothing went wrong until now. I didn't ask questions. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I turned, climbed the stairs slowly, and went into my room. I closed the door behind me. The latch clicked like the closing of a vault. I sat on the edge of my bed, the one we bought after Elias's second promotion. Still firm after all these years. I looked out the window toward the maple tree that used to drop its red gold leaves over our porch every fall. I remembered Damian under it at 6 years old, dragging a rake twice his size, cheeks pink from cold. Now that boy stood downstairs holding my signature like a sword. I opened the drawer in my nightstand. Inside was a faded envelope marked E.T. for Elias Thorne. I didn't open it. I just touched it. Then I reached deeper and pulled out my notebook. It had a list already started. Roofing repairs, window replacements, garden landscaping, every major upgrade since Elias passed. Most of it paid in cash. Every bit of it funded from my pension and my savings. I stood and walked over to the closet, slid the suitcase from the back corner. Not because I was leaving, but because I knew I wouldn't sleep that night. And if I wasn't going to sleep, I might as well pack. Or plan. Downstairs, I could hear the murmur of Damian's voice, probably calling his wife. I didn't listen. I had 48 hours, and they wouldn't be wasted. I woke early. The house was still too still for a place that once rang with laughter, spilled coffee, and creaky floorboards under Elias's heavy footsteps. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and went downstairs. Damian hadn't stirred. Good. I made coffee the way Elias liked it, strong with a pinch of cinnamon. It felt wrong to make it without him, but I needed the ritual. Something to remind me that not everything had been taken yet. As it brewed, I stood in the doorway of the living room. The beam over the mantel still bore the small nick where Elias slipped, with the hammer cursed under his breath, then laughed so hard his shoulders shook. I used to tease him about it. We never fixed it. Said it gave the room character. I took my coffee into the dining room. The sunlight through the blinds cast soft lines across the floor I'd scrubbed by hand just last month. I sipped slowly, not thinking about the 48-hour deadline, but about how quickly a house can forget who kept it standing. At 8:05, I picked up my phone and dialed Joyce. We hadn't spoken in a few months. But when she answered, she didn't sound surprised. I figured I'd hear from you soon, she said, her voice sharp as ever. I told her everything except the part where I wanted to scream. She listened, didn't gasp, didn't offer sympathy, just asked the right questions. Do you have copies of your upgrades? Is the deed in his name only? Did you sign over? Full power of attorney? Yes, I said, but only temporarily, for medical emergencies. Joyce exhaled. Then let's start with what's still yours. After I hung up, I called a second number, then a third. People Elias once worked with, names we hadn't mentioned in years. Contractors, a developer, a man named Sam who owed me a favor. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't cry. I just wrote names and notes in the same notebook I'd used the night before. Then I went up to the attic. Something was waiting. The attic smelled like dust and cedar, the one kind I didn't mind. Elias had built the shelves up here himself, hands blistered from stubbornness and pride. He never believed in hiring help for things he could figure out on his own. I suppose I inherited that. In the far corner, beneath a blanket and a box of faded Christmas ornaments, I found the plastic file bin. Blue lid. labeled in black ink house 2001 present. I carried it downstairs like a relic, set it on the dining table, poured myself another cup of coffee, then opened it. The top folder read, Damian, tuition, 4 years at Oregon State, tuition textbooks, meal plans, every bank transfer I'd made, printouts from the online portal. Over $94,000 by the time he graduated. He'd never asked how I'd done it, and I never told him that the Hawaii trip I dreamed of died with every payment. The next folder was thicker. Mortgage payoff. After Elias passed, I took every overtime shift they offered. Double weekends, holidays, night shifts. I'd come home and sit in this same kitchen, nursing my feet in a bucket of hot water, watching the loan balance tick down like a slow countdown to peace. 3 years. That's how long it took me to pay off the remaining balance. I ran my hand over the last folder. House improvements. Inside were photos of the new roof, the email confirmation for the upgraded HVAC system, permits for the kitchen remodel. The receipts were neatly paper-clipped, each with notes in my handwriting. Elias always said I was organized to a fault. I smiled. Then I cried, not because I was hurt, but because I knew what I held. Damian could wave a deed in my face, but I held the history. The bones of this house were mine. I slipped everything into a single envelope marked trust, then pulled out a smaller folder from beneath the bin, one I hadn't opened in years. Elias's will. I laid it flat on the table, heart pounding slow and heavy. Then I flipped to the page that mattered most. I had read Elias's will once the week after his funeral. I remembered the main things: the house, the savings account, the car. But I hadn't paid much attention to the fine print then. Grief makes words blur. Now I read every line like it was a confession. The page I flipped to was labeled Property and Land Use, Contingent Ownership. I traced the paragraph with my finger. The structure located at 17 Aspen Circle shall pass in full to Maribel Thorne upon my death. The land beneath said structure shall remain held in the Thorne Family Living Trust, unless explicitly transferred by Maribel Thorne, sole trustee. My breath caught. I read it again. Then again. Elias hadn't just left me the house, he'd separated the land beneath it, protected it, secured it in a living trust, untouched by the house deed itself. And I was still the trustee. Damian had never asked, never thought to check. He'd taken the house without realizing he didn't own the ground it stood on. I sat back in the chair, a strange calm settling over me. All those long nights Elias spent in his office, shuffling paperwork and humming under his breath. I used to tease him for being dramatic. But now, I saw it for what it was, a safeguard. For me, for what we built. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. I turned to look out toward the yard Elias once mowed every Saturday. I imagined Damian out there in the coming weeks, trying to impress the neighbors with his new ownership, smiling wide, hosting barbecues, and never realizing the foundation was slipping out from under him. I stood up and walked back to the attic. Pulled down another box, this one marked Legal Active. I found the trust document sealed, notarized, untouched. Still valid. Still mine. Downstairs, I heard the front door close. Damian was home. I didn't rush. I just brought the folder down, set it next to the envelope of receipts, and picked up the phone. It was time to call Joyce again. Joyce met me at her office just after lunch. The same building she'd worked in since Elias first introduced us 30 years ago. She didn't ask about Damian. She didn't need to. I handed her the trust documents and Elias's will. She skimmed silently, then looked up at me with a small nod. "This is clean," she said. "Tight." He knew what he was doing. I felt a sharp heat rise behind my eyes. He always did. She pulled out a yellow legal pad, began outlining the next steps. "You're still the sole trustee of the land. You can lease it, revoke access, or if you want, sell it. I want the cleanest option, I said. I don't want a war. Just resolution. Joyce looked over her glasses. Sometimes they're the same thing. We drafted the paperwork together. I initialed where I needed to. Signed my name 3 times. Then she made a copy and tucked it into a sealed envelope marked for overnight delivery. He doesn't need to know anything I said, watching her slide the papers away. No, she agreed. Not yet. I left her office with the envelope still warm from the printer. On the way home, I pulled over near the old lumber yard and made one more call. The number was still in my phone. Sam Elias Trust Dev from years ago. He picked up on the second ring. Maribel Thorne. It's been a while. I told him about the trust, the house, the situation. Sam didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause. Still a prime lot, he said. Quiet street. Plenty of potential. I don't need potential, I said. I need a buyer who won't blink when things get messy. I'll run the numbers, he said. If it checks out, I can make an offer. I hung up and drove home slowly. Damian was in the living room watching something loud and smug on the television. He barely looked up when I walked past. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. There was still one more list I needed to make. I started with the living room. The sofa was mine, bought 2 winters ago after my back started giving me trouble. I slipped a blue sticky note on the armrest and wrote in block letters, "Purchased by M. Thorne." The flat-screen TV was next. I had the receipt folded neatly in my file. The curtains, Damian's wife adored them. But I picked them, paid for them, and hung them with Elias's old leveler. By the time I reached the kitchen, my notes had grown more confident. The microwave, the blender, the chairs, I marked them all. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. They were mine. Not gifts. Not borrowed. Mine. Upstairs, I labeled my bedroom dresser, the nightstands, the antique lamp from my sister. I didn't touch Damian's old room. I had nothing to prove there. That night, I sat at the table with a cup of coffee and stared at the quiet house around me. Every object I'd loved now bore a sticky claim. But it didn't feel like taking it. Felt like reminding. I hadn't stolen anything. I had simply kept what they forgot was never theirs. The movers arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. A young crew, polite and quick. I walked them through the house with my notebook open, pointing to the notes and confirming the list. They moved with quiet efficiency, loading furniture, appliances, boxes marked fragile and Thorne. Storage. By noon, the house echoed. Even the smallest sounds, shoe scuffs, drawer handles, seemed louder without fabric or furniture to soak them in. The place felt like what it had become, a structure, not a home. I walked back through one last time. Damian was still gone. I didn't know where he was, and I didn't care to ask. At the front door, I paused and pulled Elias's old tool belt from the hall closet. Worn leather. Still smelled faintly of sawdust. I nailed it gently to the inside of the door frame. Not out of anger, just a reminder. Let them see what's missing. Then I stepped out onto the porch and locked the door behind me. I was already on my second cup of coffee when Damian's car pulled into the driveway. His wife stepped out first, tugging her cardigan tight, like she was bracing for wind. Damian followed, key already in hand, laughing at something she'd said. Then the door opened, and the laughter stopped. From across the street, seated on Joyce's porch swing, I could see everything. The halt in his step, the way his wife turned in a slow circle in the entryway, mouth parting, as she took in the bare walls, the empty corners. "Where is everything?" she shouted, voice rising through the still air. Damian disappeared from view. I imagined him walking from room to room, searching for the familiar. The living room without the couch, the kitchen without the chairs, their bedrooms stripped of curtains. He probably paused at the door frame, where Elias's tool belt still hung like a ghost. Joyce leaned over, handed me a biscotti. I took it without breaking my gaze. He stormed back out onto the porch a few minutes later, phone in hand. He didn't call me. just stood there pacing, muttering under his breath. His wife looked furious, arms crossed, tight eyes, scanning the yard like someone might pop up with an explanation. I didn't wave, didn't flinch. I just sipped my coffee and watched as Damian realized what I already knew: you can't inherit a home by taking possession. You earn it by the sweat you leave in the walls, by the nights you spend. Repairing, dreaming, giving. He wanted a house. He took one, but now he stood in a shell. They didn't notice me sitting there until he turned and looked straight across the street. His face shifted. Recognition, then confusion, then something closer to dread. Joyce stood up, brushing crumbs from her lap. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, placing my empty mug on the railing. Damian was still staring. I let him. We had an appointment to keep at the city office. Time to finalize the next step. It arrived 2 days later. A thick envelope from the city planning department addressed to Damian Thorne, marked certified mail. Urgent. I knew because Joyce had copied me on the documents. She always did like a touch of flair in her timing. Damian didn't call, but I heard about it through a neighbor, Mr. Keaton, who'd stopped me outside the post office that morning. "Something happening with your old place?" he asked, brows raised. Saw a notice posted on the door. I smiled politely and told him I wasn't sure. Then I walked away. But I knew. Inside the envelope was the city's acknowledgement of the trust's land sale, along with a posted notice of intent to build. The lot beneath the house was now in the hands of Sam's development firm. The trust had revoked all prior use agreements. Damian's name wasn't on the land, only the house deed. And now the land and the structure were legally severed. The letter from the city laid it out in sharp legal terms, per municipal zoning regulations and verified transfer of land rights. All structures currently occupying 17 Aspen Circle are in violation of revised land use agreements. The house must be vacated within 30 days to allow for pre-construction environmental evaluation. And then the sentence I'd waited to see printed. "You own the walls, Mr. Thorne, but not the ground beneath them." Joyce and I celebrated with coffee that evening. Strong, dark, with a hint of caramel syrup, the way she liked it. We sat in her office while the last of the daylight slipped behind the pines outside. "Think he'll fight it?" she asked. "Probably," I said, "but not for long." She nodded. "He underestimated you." "They always do," I said. My phone buzzed on the table. "Damian." I didn't answer. Let him read the fine print. Let him walk those empty rooms and realize they're floating on nothing. Joyce pushed the signed papers toward me. "One more copy for the record," she said. I signed, capped the pen, and tucked everything neatly into my bag. He knocked twice, firm, impatient. I didn't get up right away. I let the silence stretch before walking slowly to the door and opening it just enough to see his face. Damian looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, but the kind that comes when the world you built on sand begins to slide out from under you. His shirt was wrinkled, collar, open jaw, clenched tight. "You blindsided me," he said. I didn't step aside. "No," I said quietly. "I warned you the day you told me I had 48 hours. His mouth opened like he was about to protest, but nothing came. He looked over my shoulder as if expecting to find the old house behind me. He was looking for something familiar. He didn't find it. "You didn't have to go this far," he said, voice low. "It's just a house." I felt something flicker in my chest. Maybe sorrow. Maybe nothing. No, Damian. It was never just a house. He shifted his weight, looked down at the floor, then back up. "You can stop this. The builder hasn't broken ground yet. Just reverse it. Please." I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched him the way I used to when he was a boy and lied about something small like sneaking cookies before dinner. The difference now was that he wasn't 6, and this wasn't crumbs on the floor. "I can't go back there," he said. "There's nothing left." I gave a small nod. That part is true. He took a breath, about to say something else, maybe the words he thought I wanted to hear. I never gave him the chance. I stepped back just enough to close the door between us. No slamming. No final word. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. Behind me, the kettle was still whistling. I turned it off, poured myself a fresh cup, and carried it to the window. The street below was quiet, but somewhere beyond it, I knew the final shift was beginning. The porch is small, but it's mine. White railings, 2 rocking chairs, a hanging fern that I water every morning. I don't have to ask permission to plant tomatoes in the side yard or repaint the front door. I chose the yellow, warm, soft, something Elias would have called sunshine, without showing off. Autumn came early this year. The leaves scattered across the walkway in lazy spirals, and the breeze carried the faint scent of cinnamon from the cafe down the block. My granddaughter Lila sat across from me with her knees tucked beneath her, nursing a mug of cocoa. She looked around like she always did, eyes tracing the wood beams and windows. "Grandpa would have been proud of this," she said, brushing her curls out of her face. "The porch especially." I smiled, not answering right away. Elias used to talk about porches as though they were the soul of a house where people met, where truth settled in. I liked to think he'd be glad mine finally felt quiet again. "Did Dad ever say sorry?" she asked, hesitating. "No," I said simply. "But that's all right." She looked down at her mug, thoughtful. "It's not fair." "No," I agreed. "But it's finished." The house Damian tried to claim had been flattened in the spring. The developer moved fast once the permits cleared. Nothing dramatic, just machines, workers, and time doing what grief couldn't. Turned it back to soil. Sometimes I wondered if he visited the lot. If he stood where the living room used to be and tried to remember what it felt like to sit in a place built by hands that loved him. Lila leaned her head on my shoulder. I wrapped an arm around her and closed my eyes for a moment. This wasn't the home Elias and I built, but it was mine. Fully. Freely. And maybe legacy wasn't about who inherited the house. Maybe it was about who came back to sit with you when the noise had finally gone quiet. I reached for my coffee and watched the sun shift along the rail, warming the edge of the porch with gold.